Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining the second episode in this special 6-part education series with our partner New Profit, where we are talking about re-architecting the future through philanthropy and social entrepreneurship. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are all keeping well during what has and continues to be a challenging time for so many people. I'm Juliet Scott-Croxford, CEO at Earth Media, and I'm delighted to be joined by our special guest today, Leila Avila, CEO and Executive Director for Education Leaders of Colour, Desmond Blackburn, PhD, CEO at New Teacher Centre, and Gia Trong, CEO for Envision Education, along with our moderator today, Shruti Saira, Managing Partner at New Profit and co-leader for Reimagine Learning and Early Learning Funds. A very warm welcome, everyone. Hi, speakers.
Hello.
Hi.
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 Hi there.
Our intention at Worth is to create conversations that help inspire, inform and activate our community, many of whom are investors and funders, entrepreneurs and leaders who want to leave a positive impact on the world and to help create a more inclusive and equal economy and society for the benefit of everyone. And we call that Worth Beyond Wealth. So we hope you enjoy this session and this series and find it valuable. This education series is all about breakthrough impact. Philanthropy, like other sectors facing a moral reckoning on racial equality, continues to have a vital role to play in creating an America that lives up to the promise of its founding ideals. But we must overcome the bias and barriers that have existed in philanthropy for too long if we hope to unlock the ideas, the talent, and the collaborations that can drive us towards a more equitable future. In this second session, we'll be discussing how we can use a new lens to see and invest in transformative change in education, looking at how COVID-19 and an intense national focus on racial equity have changed the way we work and learn. So we're thrilled to be joined by social entrepreneurs and leaders, Leila Avila, CEO, Executive Director for Education Leaders of Colour, Desmond Blackburn, CEO for New Teacher Centre, and Gia Trong, CEO for Envision Education, to share their perspectives on the future of education. A few housekeeping rules before I hand over to Shruti. This is a conversation and we really do welcome questions from you and any comments. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Set it to send to all panelists and attendees. Do share any comments or thoughts that you have throughout the session, as well as any questions which we will get to in the last segment of this session, and we can unmute you to ask the question yourself, or we can weave it into the conversation as we go. Without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce Shruti Saira, Managing Partner at New Profit and co-leader for Reimagine Learning and Early Learning Funds, and our moderator for today. Prior to New Profit, Shruti managed a campaign for California State Assembly. She worked to start up a non-profit organisation and held a series of manufacturing quality management positions. Shruti also holds a SB from MIT, an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, and an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School, and is a Para Aspen Education Fellow. Shruti, hi, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. I am delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here not only to have this conversation with you all, but to be with my colleagues on this screen, who are three of my favorite people in the education space. So thank you and welcome to Gia, Desmond, and Lila. So I'd love to just start with a little bit of a reminder and a refresher on who New Profit is. I'll ask my colleague Sam to drop a few links into the chat box so you can get a little bit more information if you'd like to dig in. That being said, as you all know, New Profit is one of the original and longest standing venture philanthropy firms across the globe. We have a 20-year track record to supporting great social entrepreneurs to reduce barriers to opportunity for all Americans. We are also working to fundamentally advance inclusive impact by centering equity in our work through investing in proximate leaders who, as some of you heard in the last session with Tulane, through their experiences and activities, work to make themselves knowledgeable and aware of the communities they aim to serve so that they can do so with deep care, humility, and respect. I'll ask with Sam having dropped in some links that you can see there, I will move us on to what we talk about today, which is education. And to set the stage a little bit, prior to March, we, the people in this virtual community, and many people around the country, knew that there are systems and structures that drive inequities in education. We've all been working to change this in our own ways, and it was hard to imagine making wholesale and fundamental changes to education while the plane was in the air, so to speak. And then the pandemic hit, which led us to do something completely unprecedented. We shut down all schools across the country in March. And what's followed since, not only because of the health pandemic, but because of the multiple nationwide and worldwide crises that ensued, is that we've understood the systemic inequities that exist. They've been laid bare by the current circumstance, and they've indeed been exacerbated by it. And we wouldn't be social entrepreneurs if we didn't also say that this creates an opportunity for greater wholesale redesign and re-architecture of our systems so that they can be rooted in equity. So we come to this session with an intent to understand and think about these systemic inequities while also exploring the opportunities before us to fundamentally re-architect and reimagine what education is and can be going forward. So to help with this, we have our three extraordinary CEOs, and I think Sam has been dropping bios and information about each organization into the chat box. All of these CEOs, through their own experiences and intentional actions daily, are deeply proximate leaders who will bring to bear that expertise born of proximity to help us think through this. So we're going to start with a few quick hit questions to get voices into the room and get you getting to know these leaders beyond what you see in their bios. So I'll just start with acknowledging there's a lot going on for every single person right now. We also, each of us, have different humans and creatures in our environments that might show up on the screen unexpectedly. So let me just start with, how are you doing? And maybe let's go around. Gia, you're first on my screen. Do you want to share how you're doing?
Hi, Shruti, and hi, everyone. I am hanging in there. It is a really hard question to answer these days. And I'm taking it one day at a time. So hang in there.
Thank you, Gia. Desmond, do you want to go next?
Probably the same. Thank you, Shruti. Probably the same. Given I've started so many conversations with how are you doing, and I've realized that given today's reality, that's such a trick question these days. But given everything going on, those who are in close proximity to me, family and friends, I have to say we're doing okay. In terms of how we're seeing the world and our nation right now, and the impact on all of our extended friends and family, it's some days are tough.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. Lila, how about you?
So first, I feel really, really fortunate and thankful because I think about all the work that my mother did to get me a better education, to get a better life. Like, you're seeing the fruits of it now. Mm-hmm. My kids have access to good schools. They're still engaged in school. They're they're doing well. They're adjusting well. I was able to find alternative resources for my son who was not liking online learning. And so I feel very fortunate. And I'm like, her vision of coming to this country to provide something better for us, is evident right at this time. So I feel very fortunate. At the same time, I throughout every day, at some point during the day, my heart gets really heavy because I think about the disproportionate impact that this pandemic is having on communities of color and Latino communities, in particular, being Latina. And so that's the whole. It runs the gamut. I feel very fortunate, and then there are moments throughout the day where my heart is just very heavy.
Thank you. I think it's worth it for all of us to take a deep breath. The sentiments you shared, while people could fill in different blanks to the pieces that they experience, I think a lot of us feel things that run the gamut right now. So thank you, Lila, for sharing that fully and deeply. So I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction. Again, in the spirit of quick hit answers, getting to know each other. What's something non-work related that you've learned about yourself during the pandemic? Who wants to start? I'll let you guys decide.
I'm happy to go. So one of the ways that I would unwind is just watch like really bad TV so that like my brain doesn't have to be on. But one of the things that I learned through the pandemic is that there are limits now to like how much TV and what I can actually watch, where I'm just like, I'm turning off the TV. Okay, it used to feel like such a luxury when I had time to like sit there and just veg out on something. And now I'm like, I don't even want to do that. I just want to be outside. And in California, where we have had a lot of the, the fires, like that really became a luxury of just being able to go outside. So that's one thing that I learned.
Excellent. Thank you. So no more Tiger King for you. Tia or Desmond? Tia, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I grew up really poor. My family's from Vietnam and we were refugees. And I used to criticize my mom for hoarding like, clothes that were really, really inexpensive. And right now, because of the pandemic, there's just so many sales. So my closet is full of clothes that I have not worn with tags on it. And I can't wait to wear them. But I have learned that I've become my mom.
Haven't we all in some way? But yeah, I hear you. Desmond, what about you?
Early on in this pandemic, I learned that going out to eat was far too much a part of my life for any one person, right? Learned that really quickly. I've also learned to really value the little things and how the little things aren't so little. Greeting a friend or a stranger with a handshake is missed in my world. And as a 46-year-old mama's boy, not being able to have a Mother's Day hug or a hug for her birthday in August were two missing items from life.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I'd love to hear if you were king or queen or gender inclusive royalty for a day, what's the one thing you'd hope for?
I think the one thing I would hope for is a redistribution of wealth and reparations for African Americans and for Indigenous people in this country. I hope that every single person has what they need, basic needs, food, housing, and healthcare, because nobody should be starving or in poor health or not have the medical care in such a rich country.
Beautiful.
If I were royalty for the day, I recall a day, it was around 2000 or 2001, where I was flipping channels on a Sunday morning looking at news, and I saw the preview for Al Sharpton and Newt Gingrich, who are going to be on to talk about their education initiatives. Two very different people, and that was the starting of NCLB. And so getting to a place where we once again have some bipartisan leadership around the ed sector that is supported and championed by all, right? Flaws and all, right? Flaws and all, but the support and the unity around where we could go as a sector, I long for.
Beautiful.
I think for me, if I was the queen, I'd work to build a society where we prioritize the well-being of citizens over the well-being of corporations. And you turn on the TV and the first thing that people talk about is, how the stock market is doing, right? They might mention unemployment as well, but to have a real focus on like the well-being of the citizens, right? Are they healthy? Are they living in the middle class, not in poverty? Do they have food security, housing security? those kinds of things. I heard somebody tell me the other day that in New Zealand, they have like a happiness budget or something that they have now put into place. And it sounded hokey, but when you really look underneath it, it's about the well-being of people, right? And I would hope that we would be able to get back to that.
Exactly. There are definitely countries that have happiness indices, and we don't. So I appreciate that. So to start to transition us into the substantive dialogue, maybe we can do one more question around one theme or one way your organization has responded to the current environment, recognizing that we're experiencing a health pandemic, an economic crisis, a racial justice reckoning, an environmental crisis. Two of our colleagues here are from California. They experience it daily. With all of that in mind, what's one theme or one way your organization has responded?
I'll go ahead, Jen.
Go ahead, Desmond.
Okay. Well, 22 years ago, New Teacher Center was founded on the premise that teachers in their earliest years of their career require additional training, support, coaching outside of what was gleaned in the College of Education, right? Totally right start to an organization. We've since pivoted and glad that we've made a slight but significant pivot from considering what teachers need to considering what students need, primarily systemically underserved students, and how we shape development, support, coaching for teachers and other educators around student needs. And given everything you said, Shruti, this is the right time to be student focused in our nation and certainly our schools.
Thank you. Gia, do you want to go next?
Sure. The theme that's been in my head is from Black author, poet, and activist Sonia Renee Taylor. Her quote is, "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was." We've normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. So I've been really holding that theme and trying to innovate as much as possible. So Envision operates charter schools in the Bay Area. So in our schools, the normal thing to do is actually get together with leadership and create a distance learning program and then get feedback, right, from your constituents. But we decided not to do that. We actually decided that we have never done this before, and the experts are actually the students and the families, right? The parents are going to be the co-teachers. So we did a very much like a community-based co-design of a distance learning program, and we're getting really positive results. Another part of Envision is we have a consulting division. It's our spread arm. And normally we would fly all over the country and do PD around performance assessment. But instead, our team just asks our clients or our partners, districts and schools, what do you need? We are here for you. We want to be shoulder and shoulder with you and support your community. And that it just dramatically changed everything we're doing.
Yeah, beautiful. I really appreciate the responsiveness and not moving back to normal. I think that somebody was asking for the name of the poem or poet.
Sonia Renee Taylor.
Thank you. Lila, what about you?
Yeah. So, Education Leaders of Color works to elevate the voice, the leadership, and the influence of leaders of color in education. And one of the things that became very evident at the beginning of the pandemic was that there was a real lack of vision and leadership at the federal level. And so the real leaders were our school systems leaders in school districts, in charter management organizations, who were trying to navigate their systems through this pandemic. And so one of the things that we did was we began to convene them so that they could share best practices amongst one another, so that none of them felt like they were recreating the wheel, or they could, and people felt like they could access resources that were already built. And so that was one of the first things that we did. In order to, foster that collaboration, we also implemented micro grants where we provided collaboration grants so that school systems leaders could collaborate with other school systems leaders across the country, and school systems leaders could collaborate with community-based organizations so that they could leverage the resources in their community to help navigate the pandemic. We were able to make over 30 grants, and we'll be highlighting them next week in terms of the work that these folks really took on. And they really run the gamut, but it really demonstrated to us that the systems leaders working with the community have the solutions that they need. They just need support, right? And so particularly at a place where there was a lack of federal leadership, we really wanted to do the most that we could to support the people who were leading our school systems.
Beautiful. So what I love about all three of you, your responses, is that it is really listening and hearing what your communities need and supporting deeper connection to the community's needs. And to that end, would love to see if you could help the rest of us get a little bit more proximate to the communities that you're serving. So I would love to hear the experiences the communities you're serving are having with education right now, and both the challenges as well as the assets that those communities bring to bear. Each of you works with a slightly different group directly, even though you're all aiming to serve young people and students and families across the country. But Lila, with your work with leaders of color, Desmond, your work with teachers, and Gia, your work with students and families. Would love to hear a little bit of what you're hearing and experiencing.
Sure. So, what we're hearing, our network is approximately 400 leaders of color across the country. And they work in school systems, they work in nonprofits, they work in higher education. But what we're hearing is that, if you didn't believe this before the pandemic, this certainly was cemented in that you have to take a cross-sector approach to solving educational issues. And so our leaders were telling us, I have to focus on our academic goals, but I also have to respond to the fact that we are dealing with families who have lost jobs, families who have lost loved ones, have lost breadwinners. We're seeing that students who should be, in distance learning are going out and becoming the breadwinners to help support their families. And so they were seeing the fact that they couldn't separate education from the other social issues that were exacerbated in response because of the pandemic. And so what was really important is that we help support our leaders who are taking these cross-sector approaches to solving these issues. So, they certainly recognize that, if the family is not eating or skipping meals, they don't have access to resources, it's going to be very hard for them to focus on, does my kid have a laptop? Do I have internet access? Those kinds of things. And so what we heard was that our members really recognize how these things work together, and that by addressing some of those social issues, it's actually supporting your academic goals at the same time. And so it's something that I hope that more systems leaders become aware of, and certainly people in the funding community become aware of, because I know sometimes we like to have our pet projects, right? The reality is that to solve these issues, you must take a cross-sector approach, right? Because our children, do not lead single issue lives, and the pandemic has demonstrated that.
Really helpful to think about holistic learning needs and the systems. You're looking at a whole human in front of you, and you're looking at systems that surround them besides education. So thinking about this holistically. Gia, do you want to go next, talking about students and what you're hearing?
Sure. I think I really want to acknowledge that we serve predominantly African-American, Latinx communities, low-income communities, first gen. And it is not, it's not a surprise that our students and families are disproportionately impacted by COVID and by the economic crisis and by the racial reckoning. But I often people generalize and they you know, they think about like, oh, the poor families or the poor kids or learning loss and all those things. And I really want to push back on generalizations because absolutely they're impacted. And like, I don't think our families need our sympathy. They need resources, right? They need different kind of different things. And there's a perception that, you know, there's learning loss. You know, were they learning that much in school to begin with? Is it really a learning loss? Could learning actually happen with families and community? Like, does it only happen in schools? So I just want to question a lot of these things. And I think what I've seen in our community in terms of strength is community. Our Black Student Union in our Oakland school, they fundraised the whole year for a DC trip, right? And they were so excited that they fundraised, and it's thousands of dollars. And they had to be canceled because of the COVID. They donated every single dollar to graduating seniors to help them transition to high school. You know, like that is the power of community and the power of strength. And folks are taking, you know, like individual responsibility. We have young people, we serve 6th to 12th grade that are essential workers because their parents or grandparents are, you know, vulnerable populations. And then they're coming home and they're doing their distance learning at home, right? And like the strength in that piece, I think, has been really extraordinary. And then also, I don't want to generalize that distance learning isn't working. We absolutely need some in-person learning, but there are students, especially students that suffer from anxiety, ADHD, or are diverse learners that are learning actually more at home because they are surrounded by their grandparents and their parents and their family who are giving them very humanizing experience where they're like, okay, I'm getting what I need that I wasn't getting in school because school is so silo and sometimes really disconnected to children. So I want to really question some of our assumptions and really see the assets of our community. And then like, we just need to actually really examine the current system and innovate.
Thank you, Gia. I think there's a few things in there that I'd also pull out and double click on, which is there are ways in which the language we use is damaging. Mm-hmm. So, and I'll say the education philanthropy world is talking a lot about learning loss right now. And for years talked a lot about the achievement gap, still talks about the achievement gap. Those terms are fundamentally damaging to communities. Frameworks Institute has done a tremendous amount of research on the use of the term achievement gap and how it actually has made communities who are systemically pushed into situations where their performance is lower. So let's name it's about the systems, but it's made it about the students. And I think that's the danger with language like learning loss and COVID learning slide right now, is that we don't want to make this about the students. We want to recognize that there are systems that have issues that we need to address, and that this group of people around this table are addressing those systems. So I really appreciate that, both because we need to recognize the assets communities bring, and we need to stop using language that's damaging. Gia, you look like you were about to say something else too. Yeah.
I was ready to give kind of an example, like an example to me personally. I came to the United States when I was 8 and I was an English learner, and I'm very thankful for my education and where I am today. But I'm CEO not because of what happened in school. I'm a CEO right now because of my parents and my community. Mm. My determination comes from them. My hard work ethics come from them. I've learned so much from them that is actually never measured in school. So I just really want to, you know, be mindful of like valuing our diverse community and making sure that like they are full partners in educating our kids.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gia. Desmond, would love to hear your perspective and teachers and what you're hearing.
Totally. And before I do that, I also have to double click on the fact that coming from the communities we come from and being assets based, part of our DNA is the ability to overcome overwhelmingly challenging scenarios and obstacles, right? And we need not forget that. From the teacher perspective right now, just to give you the magnitude, right? So New Teacher Center is currently working with about 20,000 teachers across 26 of our states who are impacting just south of 2 million students, right? And in that, we're talking to a lot of people. And what's happening right now for teachers, in short, we have challenges that were in existence that have been exacerbated, right, grossly. And we also have this notion of educator efficacy, the gap between skills and talents and the challenges being presented, that gap has widened significantly. So I'll give a few examples, right? I'm a former high school math teacher before I became principal superintendent and CEO. And I know, we know as teachers, that leveraging who I am as a human being to connect with who the kids are in order to convince them that the Pythagorean theorem is worth learning and I'm the one that should be teaching it, right? That relationship build is germane to education. And it's hard to do face to face in a brick and mortar setting where the students are right in front of you. Add the social distance that we've been required to have, and now those relationships are having to be established and maintained electronically in synchronous and sometimes asynchronous learning modules, just exacerbates the challenge and widens the skill gap, right? We knew of the digital divide before our current moment. We knew of that, but we were able to mitigate what kids didn't have at home by bolstering acquisition of devices and connection to high-speed internet in the schoolhouse, right? Well, the schoolhouse now became home that is in some cases deficient of those devices and connectivity, right? So again, an exacerbated challenge. And then last but not least along these lines is the home, right? There's an assumption when brick and mortar schools closed in March and most districts, perhaps even all, adopted a learn from home philosophy. There's a great assumption, a great privileged assumption in feeling that every home is conducive to learning, right? And we're forgetting that school was often the escape from some challenging home situations, right? But flipping on a dime to the asset in that, I always found it a challenge in being able to connect largely educators with a middle class mentality to the conditions that my babies were living in. But now that teachers are actually, we're looking into each other's homes, right? And teachers are doing that every day. And so the proximity to what children are actually living with and living through, I believe has gotten closer and there's greater understanding and teachers are better able, with support and coaching, use what they know of conditions and environments in order to build better relationships and better instruct.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been saying since the onset of the pandemic is that, you know, in a lot of educational settings, parents were viewed as you know, at best irrelevant and at worst as nuisances. I'm not saying across the board. This panel represents a group of people who thought differently from the get-go, but parents became primary educators, if not paraprofessionals. I mean, everybody has helped their kids get onto Zoom at a minimum, if not like helping them manage and navigate the daily challenges of, and now with hybrid environments, the challenges of going back and forth between in-person and home environments. And that's even in the formal education system. A lot of parents have taken their kids outside of formal education, given their challenges to navigate the complexities of what's going on in formal education. So I'm curious, is there anything, as you hear one another, what reactions do you have? Is it resounding yeses? Would you build on one another or disagree on any points? And then what else are we missing as we think about some of the tectonic shifts that are happening in education? You've covered many of them, but is there anything that we're missing, challenges and opportunities that we need to be thinking about?
So the one thing that that I would add is that I think that like Gia, I think of sort of the role that my parents played in ensuring that I stayed the course, right? Valued education. This is why my mother came to this country, right? To get a better education. And I think that over the years, like I've told stories about how incredible and important teachers were in my life. I got really lucky that in first grade, I had a great teacher in a bilingual setting who taught me that, you know, Benito Juarez was the president of Mexico and was of indigenous roots, right? Before I even learned about George Washington. So there was like this cultural connection, right? And valuing my heritage, right? I got really lucky that in sixth grade, I had a teacher who was like, you know what, we're going to learn pre-algebra in sixth grade. And, you know, made me feel like I was good at math, right? That is something that I could do. And then in middle school, you know, a teacher who said, I'm going to send you to a private boarding school. This is before there were charter schools in California, right? In Los Angeles. And sent me to this boarding school where I got a great education, right? Sort of had access to the best resources. And so I told this story about like the importance of teachers, and they were really important. They were central to a lot of what happened in my life. But what was left out was a lot of the policies that were in place that were enabling me to take advantage of those opportunities, right? And there were three really important ones. One was that when I was very little, my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And absent a social safety net that provided her a caregiver, I probably would have stayed home to ensure that she had food, she didn't fall, you know, those kinds of things. But there was a social safety net and there were social services and someone came to the house, which meant that she sent me to school every single day, right? We know how important attendance is. The second thing that happened was that there was, in going to college, right, I had access to Pell Grants, right? We had Columbia, which is the university I went to, had need blind admissions. So you were admitted regardless of whether your ability to pay, right? I graduated from Columbia with $5,000 in debt. That's it, $5,000, right? That made a difference to what I was able to do after I graduated. The third thing that happened was that there was immigration reform, which meant that my mother became legal, and my brother and my sister became legal, and both of them actually helped me by sending me $25, $50 to buy books, to buy a slice of pizza, to buy whatever it is that I needed, right? In supporting my education. And so sometimes we hear these stories of like these exceptional, you know, Black or brown people, what we forget are the policies that are undergirding our success. And we have to name them because these things don't happen by accident, right? There's usually some policy in place that somebody has put there to help lift people out of poverty.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I will just say, literally none of this group of panelists would be here without the immigration reforms that were in place. Desmond from Jamaica, Lila and Gia have talked about their backgrounds, and myself from India. So thank you. Desmond, Gia, anything else we're missing on the tectonic shifts and things we should be thinking about?
I'll go challenge and opportunity, right? Challenge is that we know that some of our conditions existed pre our current moment. We know that normal wasn't adequate for all students, right? Yet today's school and system leaders locally are being pressured like you wouldn't believe to return their systems to normal so that life can proceed with families and communities. And I totally get that, right? Adding to the challenge is that school and district leaders have been overwhelmed with simply surviving the moment over the last 8 or 9 months. And while intuitively they know, because they've been trained in some of the best educational leadership programs across the country. Intuitively, they know that what they should be doing is assembling cross-functional teams, strategically thinking about how to leverage the moment of crisis in order to reshape, retool, revise for the future. But they've been so bogged down with the survival of the day, right? Herein lies an opportunity for the people on this call, and that is for those of us who are not having to lead classrooms, schools, and systems, and have the opportunity to think strategically and with great intentionality about our future. Once this moment of survival is over, it would be great for us to convene and bring those system leaders into a room or multiple rooms where we are laying out some of the best, most innovative thinking on how to seize the moment of crisis and reshape, retool for the future. I think that would be an awesome contribution and a great opportunity for us all.
Excellent, excellent. So we wouldn't be true social entrepreneurs without that kind of thinking, and I really appreciate that. Go ahead, Gia.
Yeah, I appreciate what Lila shared. I would not be here without all the social programs that supported me and my family, and agreed around reinvention, especially with cross-functional groups and coalitions and folks that are proximate to the work. I think another kind of tectonic shift that needs to happen is our mindsets about education. And there's like multiple layers of mindset, right? Like we need to realize that the way it's structured right now is oppressive and isolating. And we need to like shift that education should be around community and connection and not the way it is functioning right now, especially in secondary and in high school. And that it's still really passive. It hasn't really changed. And we need to actually, really think about how do we get students to be active, and like actively self-directing their learning and directing their futures. And it's still pretty siloed, right? We're not actually like working with community to make things happen. And we need to take more of a learning stance that learning is beyond the four walls of a classroom or the Zoom screen in front of you, that it is in the community, with community partners, with parents, with family, with networks, and I think there's fundamentally so many things that need to change about how we view education because it's not working. And Desmond said it's not working for some. I said it's not working for the vast majority. And I'm talking about Black and brown communities. I'm also talking about white community and affluent community. I don't know if it is working for them. I mean, yes, they potentially are getting some of the academic skills or the degrees, but I don't know if it's really meeting every student's full potential at this point. And I think that the shift also in education is thinking about policies that are around assimilation and compliance to actually making sure that young people have what they need to change the system. Right. I did well in school because, I'm being a stereotypical Asian person, but, my family's like, listen to your teachers, be respectful. So I did everything my teacher said and I got A's. Did I learn very much? Probably not. But it helped me continue to get ahead. And I think there's like a philanthropic shift also. I know that Lila talked about these like, what did you say? Like projects, small toy projects or something like that?
Pet projects.
Pet projects, sorry. And I would really encourage folks to not come in with like, I know what to do and I know the strategy. Because quite frankly, we don't know what to do. And there is no effective strategy. And the most effective strategy comes from the folks that are most impacted, the folks that are most proximate to the work. So invest in leaders of color, invest in teachers of color. And I think not just really shifting our head that we know, right? And I would also say reevaluate your investments of white leaders with, fancy PowerPoints, because those haven't worked. So I would just really encourage philanthropic partners to really think about being responsive because there's real need right now, that are impacting families of color and low-income families, and then think about the long term and invest in communities that actually could lead us to better solutions.
Beautiful. So I'm hearing a number of calls to action in what you all have said. So Gia, very, very clear, invest in understanding the community's needs and proximate leaders to advance communities, to support against communities' needs. Desmond and Lila, I'm hearing about the combination of using social and political capital to advance policies. And thinking about how do we support on the other side of this when our systems, our district leaders and states superintendents of education and whatnot have the space to think, supporting collaboration between innovators like this group and those systems leaders to say, how can we change these systems and re-architect them? So I'm going to pause for a second and say, Juliet's mentioned it in the chat box, would encourage you to submit any questions you have for the speakers. And with that, I'm actually going to pick up a thread that Kristen Airgood named in here, talking about the appreciation for focus on families in this conversation. I happen to know that Kristen, a few of us know that Kristen is herself in her own philanthropy very focused on families. And she aptly points out that teachers need support from building principals and school systems to truly partner with families. I'm wondering if you can, if any of you could share a little bit more about what could that support look like from the context and the work that you've been doing.
One of the drums that I'm beating right now on parent support and parent engagement, and I say this both as an educator and as a parent, we really need to shift the concept of homework and what it means to send tasks into the home where at times and oftentimes parents may have had very, very negative interactions themselves with school, and or life could be so complex. So let me not look at a quote unquote challenging home, but let me talk about a home of two students, two college educated parents who are actually educators, my home. I have a son who's a junior in college and one who's a senior in high school. And I'm a math teacher, a former high school math teacher. I'm gonna tell you that my ability to support them in homework ended around 6th or 7th grade based on the complexity of the math and the time, the intense time needed to refresh my thinking, retool, and be able to support just on one problem, right? Not to mention the 3rd grade science project that I worked on with my son that I totally bombed when my wife was out of town for that. She hasn't forgiven me yet. It's just to underscore, sometimes the expectations we are placing on the home isn't always reasonable. And I think we need to rethink what homework and projects mean to the home and to the ultimate ability to learn.
Thank you. I see, I'd love to invite Juliet in to help facilitate some of the questions. I do see Thomas Stewart with his hand up and a question in the question box, and wonder if we could invite him in to bring his voice into the conversation. I don't know what it takes to do that, technically speaking, so I'm hoping somebody from the Worth team can help us on that.
Hi, I'm back. That was a great conversation. Who did you want to unmute, Shruti?
Thomas Stewart.
Okay.
Oh.
Molly, if we can unmute Thomas, that would be great. Thomas, are you there? Hi, Thomas.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
I first want to say hello to all my Pahar friends. And, you know, I was reluctant to participate today because of the sessions have not been as exciting as I had hoped, but I want to commend Shruti for the way you framed the discussion and bringing out the panelists, their experiences in this moment before jumping into the discussion. It's captivated me. Mm-hmm. And so my question for the panelists is, how has the pandemic shifted your work or your focus in a surprisingly pleasant way? And to Layla, from the perspective of leaders, Desmond for teachers, and Gia for students. Thank you all.
Thanks, Thomas.
Sure. I can go. Hi, Thomas. Good to hear your voice. So I think that, when we started Education Leaders of Color, we not only wanted to elevate and support leaders of color, but we also wanted to create a community with that focused on values-based leadership. And one of the values is around recognizing the assets in communities. So one of the ways that was really encouraging to us is that, we've been beating this drum around our values since we were formed. And to be able to see leaders put forth proposals for these collaboration grants that I talked about earlier, that really leverage the assets in communities. And it included things like leaders working with parents who are homeschooling, like really homeschooling, right? Not just, turning on the Zoom, but like are really homeschooling because they want to provide their African-American children with a curriculum that really centers their identity, right? And there are leaders who are trying to support those communities. There are leaders who are putting in place peer programs for parents. So we have these parents who are struggling to understand like the technology, right? Going from one app to another. I mean, if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. Going from this app to that app, this password to that password, like you don't have a device, the internet access, like all those things. And leaders who are putting together proposals to say, I'm going to train a set of parents to actually be support to one another so that when they basically become parent tech support, right? Because the school system doesn't have the capacity or doesn't have the resources to do it. I'm actually going to leverage the resources in this community, and we're going to train these parents to do that. So folks, in Arizona and in Georgia are really looking at leveraging those assets to support students' education during this pandemic. To me, that was like the thing that like motivates me at this time, because I'm like, this is not leaders who are just trying to go back to normal, right? They really are trying to see, how do we take what parents have to offer, what communities have to offer, what homeschoolers have to offer to really change how we support not just the parent, but the whole family. And that has been incredibly, and I'm really happy that we were able to offer those collaboration grants. And my hope is that we're able to get more resources so we can continue to do things like that, because that all came through because we were encouraging people to leverage community-based organizations, to leverage the relationships that they had with other systems leaders.
I think a positive kind of impact, and thank you, Thomas, for the question, for us is, I think a lot of school networks that are succeeding have potentially two things in common. One, they are already really facile with technology, right? Because that's just technically, it just helps, which we as a network are, so that we were lucky in that way. And two is networks that have been doing like deep equity work for years. Because like the inequity is just more than apparent. And like at Envision, we've been doing kind of deep anti-racist, pro-Black kind of focus for the last 3 or 4 years. And actually, we weren't able to shift very much in our system because all of the barriers in public education, instructional minutes, credentials, we still have that barrier, but there's just like all these limitations for us to actually innovate. So what COVID did is it got rid of instructional minutes, right? And it got rid of how many it's compliance, like in terms of in-person time, it got rid of so much. And because we have less time with students, it forced us to think about what is the most important thing. And if you have an equity focus and an anti-racist and pro-Black focus, what is the most important thing for our Black families and our students? And what is the most important thing in the time that we're in? And then now I feel like our teachers are more focused on the most important thing and not just, okay, I got to teach from 8:30 to 3:30 and get through chapter 2 to chapter 4. I mean, like, so there's a lot of opportunity and possibility. And I would say, like, continue working on your anti-racist equity lens, because without that, we're not going to actually make real change.
Thomas, thank you for the question and the push to think about the opportunities, right? And I think you're seeing a trend, and I'm going to stay consistent with the trend because I believe in it, and that is technology, right? In true alignment to the notion that necessity becomes the mother of innovation, right? I know that prior to this moment, we were not leveraging technology to its full capacity. But now, as a sector, we have been forced to embrace tech-enabled, synchronous, asynchronous, combined learning, right? We have been forced to leverage the fact that instruction can happen via a device, and there can be miles and miles of separation between the instructor and the student, which now opens up a whole nother opportunity around teacher recruitment, teacher retention, and how you look at filling vacancies, et cetera. It's also opening up, we're working with 2 school districts right now that want to, get this, elevate teacher agency and create synchronous and asynchronous professional development opportunities for teachers that are totally self-directed and competency-based, right? Making teachers the owners of their learning. Like 2 districts on 2 separate coasts of our nation are working with us to do that. So absolutely, I think being forced to depend so heavily on technology when, truth be told, it was a nice to have 11 months ago, and it's become a must-have.
Thanks for that great question, Thomas. Shruti, I think we've got time for one more question. Emily has just submitted one asking, how can philanthropists invest their efforts now to make change sooner rather than later? Who wants to take that?
I'll quickly, because I know we're short on time. Typically, philanthropy, we think about investment, we think about capital. I would encourage philanthropy, and Shruti mentioned this earlier, to think about not only financial capital, but political capital and social capital, because yes, these changes will need a financial investment, but the right person is going to have to be called, and the right people need to be assembled. And we spoke a lot about policies, both at the local, state, and federal level, that I believe the people on this call have the ability to influence.
I would encourage folks to invest in Black-led organizations and organizations led by people of color that are working with families and students of color.
Lila?
So I would say that it's very easy for us to sort of chase the shiny new object, right? Right now, there's a lot of discussion around investing in, social and emotional learning, which is right? Because our kids need that right now. Our teachers need that right now. Our principals need that right. Our leaders need that right now, for sure. But those things are not separate from some of the structural needs that school systems have. Like, do they have teachers? Do they have teachers who are equipped to support students on social and emotional learning? Do you have the leaders that you need? And and because of the pandemic, we know that there'll be a lot of teacher retirements, right, that are coming up. And so it doesn't feel sexy to invest in human capital, but the lens that you have to bring is sort of the intersectional approach, right? So you have to say, like, if somebody comes to you and says, I want to do this on social and emotional learning, ask the question, well, how is this connected to, your human capital strategy? How is this connected to ensuring that families have the supports that they need during this time, right, to support the student, right? How is this connected to your leadership strategy? You have to really push on these intersectional approaches, because there is no one solution, right? And we like to chase that thing, but the reality is, like, and our experience tells us that this takes a multi-pronged approach across sectors to really realize our full potential, to provide the kinds of schools that we all want for our students.
That's such good advice, Lila. Shruti, I know we need to close this out. Did you have any final words before I take it to a close?
Well, and my final words will be a helpful close, which is I just even appreciate the question. What we've been hearing across the philanthropic sector, and not necessarily from the kind of people who are on this call, who are revolutionary people working to push forward the field. But what we've been hearing across the sector is that a lot of philanthropists are keeping their powder dry. They're waiting till we bottom out and get to the worst of this. And that is not the right approach. And so I appreciate that people are saying, what do we do now? So thank you, and just incredible gratitude to the people who have joined this conversation.
Thanks so much, Shruti. And Lila, Desmond, and Gia, thanks so much for such an insightful and thought-provoking session. I learned so much, and it really is an education taking a look through a new lens at transformative changes in this space. A huge thank you to you too, Shruti, for brilliantly moderating the session. You're all an absolute inspiration. And a special thank you to New Profit, Sam, Sarah, Lizzie, and the team for being our partner for this series. Most importantly, thanks to you, our community, for joining us today and for your great questions and engagement. We hope you enjoyed it. Please do share feedback with us. We'd love to hear your comments. You can email us at community@worth.com. You can also register for all of the sessions in this series online at worth.com/events. Join us for the next session of this series on Tuesday, October 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. West Coast time, where we'll be talking about using a new lens to see and invest in transformative change in the workplace and in work, with some great special guests. Also tomorrow on Worth Live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we have the next instalment of The Next Normal, and we're talking about how COVID is causing us to reassess mental health in and out of the workplace. So do join us for that as well. You can register online at worth.com/events. In the meantime, be kind, stay healthy and safe, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again to everyone listening, and thanks again to the brilliant speakers and to you too, Shruti.
Thank you. Be well,
Thank you,
all.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.